South Korea off its so-called whitelist of trading partners next week. In the meantime, a top official in Seoul tells Japan that will aggravate the situation. South Korea's trade minister on a trip to Washington gets a hint from the U.S. Commerce Secretary that America is willing to mediate in the trade dispute between its two Asian allies. And North Korea says its latest missile launch was a warning to South Korea about its upcoming military exercise with the U.S. The launches, it says, were personally overseen by Kim Jong-un. It's 4:00 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us on our afternoon newscast. I'm Devin Whiting. North Korea's state media have released a report about the regime's firing this week of two short-range missiles into the East Sea. It strongly criticized South Korea, saying the launches were a warning to Seoul against its upcoming joint military exercise with the U.S. The test was organized personally, it said, by leader Kim Jong-un. Oh Jung-hee reports.
Some strong words of warning from North Korea on Seoul's upcoming joint military exercise with the U.S. next month. On Friday, Pyongyang state-run Korean Central News Agency reported that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un personally organized and oversaw the North's missile launch on Thursday. It said firing the new tactical guided weapon was an intended show of force. It was to warn South Korea for planning to go ahead with the joint military exercise despite continued messages from the North. Pyongyang said that South Korea is being contradictory, forming a conciliatory mood between North Korea and the U.S., but at the same time organizing military exercises and adopting new weapons. The North described the F-35 stealth jets that Seoul recently acquired as offensive weapons and stressed that the regime should further ramp up security to neutralize the threats. Pyongyang is confident that the missile launch would have, quote, inflicted insecurity for some, as the new tactical guided weapon it tested is, quote, superior and perfect and is hard to intercept. The North directed its warning to the South Korean chief executive, that is President Moon Jae-in, that Seoul should stop suicidal acts and not ignore the warnings from Pyongyang. Pyongyang has long been sensitive about Seoul-Washington joint military drills, calling them a rehearsal for war. Last week, the North issued a statement explicitly warning that the denuclearization talks could be at risk if South Korea and the U.S. go ahead with the exercises next month. The North also expressed negative views on receiving rice aid from the South, citing the same reason. In the end, the North took action in protest, firing what Seoul sees as a new type of ballistic missile. Oh Jung-hee, Arirang News.
And South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff have released more details about the missiles North Korea fired yesterday. Officials said Friday that a detailed assessment showed the two missiles both flew around 600 kilometers, which is different from the initial estimate of around 430 kilometers for one and 690 kilometers for the other. These figures, too, they said, are provisional and a final assessment awaits. The officials said they see the missiles as the test fire stage of missile development and they are not fully operational. Seoul's defense ministry reiterated its earlier stance that although the missiles have been officially verified as ballistic, it does not see them as a direct violation of the Inter-Korean Comprehensive Military Agreement, but that they do go against the spirit of that agreement in lowering tensions on the peninsula. North Korea's latest ballistic missile launches have reignited calls in the U.S. for further sanctions on the regime. But the Trump administration, although urging North Korea to stop its provocations, said it wants to restart nuclear talks. Lee Seung-jae reports.
The latest launches of what South Korea described as two new short-range ballistic missiles is in violation of UN Security Council resolutions on the North and may hinder the chances of Pyongyang and Washington restarting their nuclear talks anytime soon. Republican Senator Cory Gardner, chairman of the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Subcommittee on East Asia, took to Twitter on Wednesday to call on the Trump administration to impose further sanctions on North Korea and its enablers. Democratic Senator Ed Markey, a ranking member of the same subcommittee, said if the reports of the launches are true, they would violate UN resolutions. Other U.S. officials have questioned whether North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is serious about denuclearizing his regime, adding that flexibility on easing sanctions may not be the best option. President Trump, who has always praised the North Korean leader and their friendly personal relationship, has yet to comment on the launches. When the North previously fired missiles in May, Trump downplayed them and reaffirmed his confidence that Kim will uphold his commitment to denuclearize. The U.S. State Department on Thursday urged the regime to refrain from further provocations, adding it still hopes for a resumption of working-level talks on the regime's denuclearization.
I think what the president has said and what the president has stressed, and the secretary as well, is that we want to have diplomatic engagement with the North Koreans, and we continue to urge the North Koreans to resolve all of the things that the president and that Chairman Kim have talked about through diplomacy. We urge no more provocations, and that all parties should abide by our obligations under UN Security Council resolutions.
While U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo had hinted at a possible working-level meeting in the coming weeks, observers say the North's latest missile tests might mean that it's a non-starter, at least for the time being. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Now, Secretary Pompeo says the door is still open for talks with the North despite its latest missile launch. In an interview Thursday with Bloomberg, Pompeo said each government prepares for negotiations by creating leverage, describing the missile launch as a negotiating tactic. He also expressed hopes that working-level talks could resume in the next month or so. Pompeo added that he is not bothered by the delay in talks, saying both sides need to have enough conversations to produce what he called productive dialogue when they're at the table. The leaders of North Korea and the U.S. had promised to resume talks within weeks when they met last month at the DMZ. Now, South Korean President Moon Jae-in has replaced 3 of his senior aides this afternoon. Those are Cho Guk, who had been Senior Secretary for Civil Affairs, Lee Yong-sun, Senior Secretary for Civic and Social Agenda, and Jung Tae-ho, Senior Secretary for Jobs. Their replacements are Kim Jo-won, who is the CEO of Korea Aerospace Industries and will be Secretary for Civil Affairs, Kim Ko-sung, a former president of Transparency International Korea, who will be Senior Secretary for Civil and Social Agenda, and Hwang Duk-sun, who will be Senior Secretary for Jobs. The president is hoping the reshuffle will breathe some fresh life into the civil service. The Italian Football League champions Juventus are in Seoul to play the K-League All-Star team tonight. And a day before that match, some retired players from the Italian side took the time to teach some young Korean footballers. On Thursday, around 100 lucky young people gathered near Seoul World Cup Stadium to meet these players they'd only seen before on TV. David Trezeguet and Edgar Davids put the kids through their paces.
No, but it's always fun to play with the kids, and they're eager to learn. And you see that some guys already had very good basic skills. So, it's fun then to play with them.
The highly anticipated sold-out match kicks off on Friday at 8 p.m. Korea time at Seoul World Cup Stadium. The third and newest hiking trail along the DMZ will open in the border town of Paju next month. South Korea's tourism agency said Friday that group tours on this trail, about 30 kilometers north of Seoul, will start on August 10th. The 20-kilometer course will start and end at Imjingak Pavilion and pass Dorasan Observatory and a demolished guard post. For the first time, visitors will be able to see one of the 10 guard posts demolished under last September's Inter-Korean Military Accord. Tours can be booked on the agency's website. South Korea is getting drenched this week by monsoon rains, and forecasters say that'll continue through the weekend. Heavy rain warnings are in effect in the regions near the capital. On Friday, Seoul, as well as Gyeonggi-do and Gangwon-do provinces, saw rain falling at over 30 millimeters per hour. That eased up in the afternoon, but intermittent showers are forecast until Sunday. The areas around Seoul could get up to 300 millimeters. The southern provinces will see much lighter rain, which is forecast to end on Saturday. We now have a likely date for Japan's next move in its retaliatory trade restrictions against South Korea. Japan's expected to approve a rule that'll remove South Korea from its whitelist of countries that enjoy expedited procedures for exports next Friday, August 2nd. That's according to the Japanese daily Yomiuri Shimbun, which says the rule will be approved by the Japanese cabinet on that day. Once passed, it'll take effect after 21 days. Meanwhile, the U.S. has reassured South Korea that it will fulfill its role in mediating the Seoul-Tokyo trade dispute. It says it is well aware of the negative impact Japan's export curbs will have not only on the U.S. economy, but also on the global economy. Our Kim Da-mi has the details.
U.S. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross says the U.S. is willing to play a mediating role in South Korea's trade dispute with Japan. This is according to Seoul's Trade Minister Yoo Myung-hee. This came after Yoo met with her U.S. counterpart for an hour at the U.S. Department of Commerce on Thursday.
U.S. Commerce Secretary recognized the negative effects of the unfair export control measures on U.S. industry as well as the global economy and mentioned it would do its necessary role.
Speaking to reporters in Washington, D.C., she also emphasized that the U.S. representative seemed well aware of how Japan's export restrictions could harm American industries, including the smartphone and semiconductor sectors. As to what kind of the role the U.S. will play, Yoo only noted that the U.S. is well aware of its role in the Seoul-Tokyo trade dispute. However, Washington has given off mixed signals on whether or not it might get actively involved in the issue. Early on Thursday, a parliamentary delegation from South Korea also met with Senator Tom Cotton and Representative Ted Yoho, among others, in a bid to resolve the Seoul-Tokyo trade spat. Speaking after those talks, Jung Se-gyun, who's leading Seoul's delegation, said the U.S. generally understands Seoul's position and that Japan's move goes against free trade principles, but it's difficult for them to get directly involved. Some of the delegation also met with Mark Napper, the State Department's Deputy Assistant Secretary for Korea and Japan, who echoed those remarks. Napper reportedly said the trade tensions will likely have an impact on their trilateral security cooperation, but the U.S. isn't in a situation to come up with a concrete response. On Friday, the South Korean delegation will attend a biannual meeting with U.S. and Japanese lawmakers. Kim Da-mi, Arirang News.
Japan is looking to remove South Korea from its whitelist of preferred trade partners, but Seoul's Foreign Minister Kang Kyung-hwa told her Japanese counterpart today not to aggravate the situation. Seoul's Foreign Ministry says Kang and Japanese Foreign Minister Taro Kono spoke on the phone Friday morning, and Kang once again urged Tokyo to remove its trade restrictions on Seoul. Kono held his ground on that issue, but they did agree on the need to continue dialogue through various channels and to use multilateral meetings to exchange views. The two diplomats also discussed North Korea's latest missile launch. They agreed that Seoul, Tokyo, and Washington need to work together at such an important juncture. North Korea is also criticizing Japan for its export curbs on the South, accusing Japan of using trade to cover up its wartime atrocities. Speaking exclusively to South Korean broadcaster KBS at an international forum in the Philippines, the vice chairman of Pyongyang's Korea-Asia-Pacific Peace Committee, Lee Jong-hyuk, said the restrictions are not just economic retaliation. Rather, he said Tokyo is using them to whitewash its war crimes. He also said Japan needs to apologize and compensate the Koreans it used for forced labor and those it sexually enslaved if it wants to mend ties with Pyongyang. South Koreans have been boycotting Japan because of the trade conflict. That includes not only Japanese products, but also travel to the country. And the boycott is apparently taking a toll on Japan's tourism and retail industries. Lee Min-sun reports.
About a month since South Koreans began their mass boycott of Japanese products, the Japanese economy is suffering from a drop in the number of tourists. Japanese daily Asahi Shimbun reported that a large drop in spending by South Korean visitors is damaging Japanese tourism and retail industries. The newspaper found that since the boycott movement started, some 1,100 Koreans canceled their reservations at Japan's traditional hotels in Oita Prefecture, a popular tourist destination with hot springs. The report also said the number of South Korean visitors to Japan has decreased by 10% in July compared to the same period last year, citing data from Japan's largest travel agency, JTB Corp. Reservations for the jet ferry that runs between Busan and Osaka have fallen to 1/3 of the usual amount, and many Korean low-cost carriers have decided to cancel their scheduled flights to Japan. Japanese retailers are also suffering from the boycott. One of the largest shopping outlets in Fukuoka saw sales decrease by 25% during the week up to July 23rd compared to the year before. Other major Japanese firms like Asahi and Kirin breweries have pulled their TV advertisement from South Korea, and Japanese clothing brand Uniqlo also saw falling sales in July. However, the boycott movement is spreading to wider areas in South Korea. In addition to customers not buying Japanese products, many retail shops and traditional markets have declared that they will not sell Japanese products. South Korea's Logistics Association also announced that they will not deliver specific Japanese brands. With the trade conflict between two countries still lingering, the boycott and its impact on both countries' economies could grow even larger. 이민선, 아리랑 뉴스.
South Korean consumers are apparently losing confidence in the local economy. The Composite Consumer Sentiment Index fell for the third consecutive month in July. According to the Bank of Korea, the figure stands at 95.9 for this month, below the threshold of 100, meaning there are more pessimists than optimists. The figure is down 1.6 points from June and is at the lowest level since last November. The BOK attributed the fall to Japan's export restrictions, the ongoing U.S.-China trade war, sluggish export growth, and falling stock prices. The government has announced new tax credits for companies to encourage them to invest more in facilities. Also, companies that open up in areas where there's been a lack of jobs, they'll operate 100% tax-free for 5 years. So Eun-kyung has this report.
The Ministry of Economy and Finance has introduced a revised tax code starting in 2020, focusing on providing tax incentives to Korean companies. The aims of the changes are to cultivate new technologies, create jobs, and boost the domestic economy. Recent sluggish corporate investment in Korea and slumping global trade have largely contributed to the government decision. In fact, construction and facility investment in Korea has seen negative growth since the second quarter of last year. The revised tax code increases the tax credits for facility investment from 1% of the investment to 2% of the investment for large companies. For mid-sized companies, tax credits increase from 3% to 5% of investment, and small-sized companies will see their tax credits rise from 7% of investment to 10% of their facility investment. This change will be applied next year and is expected to reduce the tax burden on companies by nearly $450 million. The new tax plan also includes tax incentives for employment crisis areas suffering from large-scale bankruptcy or restructuring of enterprises. Currently, any companies that open their businesses in those areas will be 100% exempt from paying corporate tax for 5 years. The revised tax code will also give these companies a 50% tax cut for the following 2 years. In addition, the revised tax plan offers extended tax support to SMEs, which hire women whose career have been interrupted. 서은경, 아리랑 뉴스.
The number of companies on the Korean stock market at risk of being delisted has risen to a 5-year high. The Korean Exchange said Friday that 26 companies have been looked at so far this year to see whether they meet the standards to be listed. That's a jump of 53% from the same period last year. Many of these companies were unable to give their shareholders information that they were required to give them, which is common in an economic slowdown. Last year, more than 100 companies on the KOSDAQ gave their shareholders false information, which was a rise of more than 42%. The Seoul metropolitan government is running a campaign to reduce teenage obesity. The campaign aims to reduce the amount of sugar consumed by adolescents in view of government surveys that found their sugar intake is higher than other age groups. Images promoting a reduction in sugar intake have been posted on public buses and on social network services. The campaign is being run jointly by 2 global public health agencies. Last year, Seoul joined the Partnership for Healthy Cities, a global organization that aims to reduce the number of deaths from non-communicable diseases and traffic accidents. It's time now for an in-depth look at the global markets this afternoon, and for that I'm joined here in the studio by Dr. Kim Se-won, professor of economics at Ewha Women's University. Dr. Kim, thanks for coming in today.
You're welcome.
Well, this week we saw Korea make the case at the WTO that Japan's trade curbs on it are unjustified. Of course, the Korean side will have more to say on this matter going forward, but where do things go from here?
From the scene of Japan's avoid talk with Korea, South Korean government had a partial success in revealing Japan's unreasonable export restrictions on Korea. I think in the next step, Korean government can file a petition against Japan's unreasonable export restrictions for having WTO's final judgment. But I have to say that for having a final judgment from WTO, we have to wait like more than 2 years at least. And another thing is it doesn't have any legal bindings on Japanese action.
Yeah, 2 or 3 years seems like far too long to wait.
Exactly.
Yeah, but it is looking more and more likely that Japan will go ahead and implement this measure to take Korea off of its whitelist of trading partners. And that presents problems in the WTO in terms of giving countries equal treatment. Now, there's clearly growing international support for Korea on this issue. Do you think Japan is going to ignore all of that and just go ahead with this whitelist measure?
I think the possibility is very high. Related to removing South Korea from white list of the Japan, Japanese government collected more than 30,000 feedbacks from inside and outside. And according to Yomiuri Shimbun's report, as we have seen from previous report, about 90% of the feedbacks supports Japanese government's action. That means delisting South Korea from the white list. So I believe that Japanese government will go for delisting South Korea from the list.
Because they have so much support domestically.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, assuming Japan does do this, reports are saying that it will happen, at least the measure in the Japanese cabinet will be taken on August 2nd, which is just next week. That does not give South Korea a lot of time to get ready. But what can Korea do to prepare for this?
Actually, both of South Korean government and South Korean business associations submit a very gentle and polite letter to Japan's Ministry of Trade demanding no further restrictions on Korea. But I don't think that will be accepted by Japanese government this time. But if finally Korea is delisted from the white list of Japan, Japanese government can impose restrictions on more than 1,000 export items to Korea. That physically and technically can have a huge impact on Korean manufacturing sector in the end. But in the end, if that goes on further, in the end, South Korean corporations will find substitutions from other countries on imported items from Japan. That really dismantled the global value chains and manufacturing structures.
1,000 products, though.
Exactly.
That's far beyond semiconductors.
Exactly. So this Japanese government imposed restrictions on semiconductor production is not a problem of only semiconductor industry. That impact spreads out to all the other industries according to global value chains established for the last 50 years.
Right. Well, right now, South Korean lawmakers are in Washington, D.C., and they're meeting with U.S. lawmakers and other officials to see if they can get the U.S. to mediate in this thing. And it seems like they have had some success, but also they'll be meeting with Japanese lawmakers, and that'll be an interesting chance to sort of exchange views. It sounds, I mean, I'm sure it's supposed to be very diplomatic, but it sounds like it could be interesting. What do you think is going to come out of that?
Actually, there will be another round of diplomatic war between Korea and Japan for gaining U.S. Congress support, I think. But for both of U.S. government and Congress, it is not comfortable to intervene to allies diplomatic conflicts between Japan and Korea. So I believe that it will be not easy to gain U.S. Congress support on this issue.
Fascinating. It'll be, things are changing so fast all the time. But that's where we're going to have to leave it today, Dr. Kim. Good discussion. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you very much.
That brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.